time that I did come into a mosque. And it was just about a year ago, and it was in a mosque that was in a small, in a village, I guess, on the outskirts of Ramallah. And it was while I was working for an Israeli human rights organization called B'Tselem. I got a very warm welcome in the mosque, which was very wonderful. I mean, it made me feel that there was kindness, that there was an ability to stretch beyond the barriers that between Israelis and Palestinians we sometimes feel. This was particularly unique because this was a mosque that the evening before had just been firebombed by some settlers who came from a settlement just adjacent, and they came in the middle of the night. They lit the mosque on fire. There's some difficulty because the community wanted to call. They live in an area that is controlled by Israel for services such as the fire department and theoretically for the police as well. The fire department wouldn't come into this particular place, so the people had to take care of putting out the fire themselves, which they did. There was an investigation. No one in this particular case no one was specifically charged with any crime, but it does lead me to think that there is, I guess, the welcome that I received there really highlighted for me what was a great factor, which is something that I guess is really at the source of the hope that I have. And it's the source that despite a reason for feeling a great amount of hatred, a great amount of distrust for any Israeli who comes, there's an ability, even after quite a tragic event, to say, you know something, let's invite this person in, let's speak with them, let's talk, and perhaps somehow together we have things that we share that are in common. I want to move now just not to speak about B'Tselem, the organization that I worked for that dealt with human rights issues, but actually just to focus on the name B'Tselem itself. B'Tselem is the Hebrew, it's a Hebrew word, and it comes from the creation story. And it means as part of the creation story, which is a story that we all share, we say that God created man in his own image. And B'Tselem Elohim means in the image of God. And that's something that I carry with me as a very powerful motivating factor of why we need to find a way out of this. One, because we need to find ways to protect all of the living people, all humans that live and that share this small piece of land that people know as Israel and know as Palestine. The other side, and this is really the core, and I think one of the things that gives me a tremendous amount of hope, is that if we are created in the image of God, then it also means that we have this tremendous ability, not exactly the way that God does, but this tremendous creative energy and ability to receive a situation and to change it. We don't necessarily have to take what we get and say this is just the situation. We have an ability to inject ourselves, to push ourselves into history, and by making this history, we can make this history better. And that's something that motivates me tremendously, and one of the reasons that brings me here to have this conversation with you. I'll share just one small story from, you may have noticed that some people who are not from your general community have just joined. One is my friend Stephen Feinstein, another is Gila Silverman. These are friends of mine who, I think back to a time in Israel when we were living there together. They now live in Arizona, I still live in Israel. It was a time of tremendous hope when we, as young people, moved to Israel from the United States. And it was a time during the early 90s when it was the beginning of a peace process. And I remember just before I was to get married, coming to meet Stephen, it was the night before we were flying out. And we were going to be flying out, and I was supposed to meet him at a restaurant at 8 o'clock with at that time, his wife, Tamar. I was supposed to show up at 8, and I didn't show up at 8. I was supposed to show up at 9, I didn't show up at 9. I think I finally showed up at about 9:45. My wife-to-be was waiting there. And the reason that I was late is because at that time I was serving in the Israeli military. I was an officer in the reserves, I'm now retired. But I was working very hard on the political process, and this even before the peace. This was the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, the Oslo process, and also the peace process involving other areas of the world. in the context of that work, which kept me, I mean, I suppose I didn't need to mention Stephen in this instance, but in the context of this work, it was, what was striking to me is that I was working day and night to try to bring peace to the land, and it was a time when there was a tremendous amount of optimism in the world as a whole. It was a time when the Soviet Union had collapsed. It was a time when it seemed that freedom was sweeping across Europe. It seemed that there were demonstrations for democracy in China, and it was a time that in our specific region, following the initial first meeting of Israeli leaders with leaders of Arab states, and following the beginning of the Oslo process, that we thought perhaps our world also was opening. It was a time of great hope, and it was a time also for me as a young person just about to get married. I remember thinking to myself, I will be able to tell my children that I was part of this historic process to bring peace, which was extremely exciting. It made me motivated. It made me want to work day and night, which I did. It was a wonderful feeling. Sadly, as you know, the peace process did not go the way we wanted it to, and we have suffered pretty horrible wars as we've moved through these times. This summer was a very, very difficult time, as the destruction in Gaza is quite horrific. The fear on both sides from missiles and from other types of violence is awful, and there's a sense of hopelessness. But at the same time as there's this sense of hopelessness, and this is what I hope that we will have an opportunity to speak about more during the conversation that we'll develop shortly, at the same time as there's a sense of hopelessness amongst many, I think there are also opportunities to move forward that we didn't have in the past. I think out of this sense of despair, many people are tired and believe that we have to find another way. And it is in this, perhaps to a certain extent, it's in this exhaustion. Perhaps it's in some of the new balance that we have in the region that various actors in various states are finding very threatening. That we'll be able to find different coalitions and a coalition of people who want to find a different way, who want to move forward towards peace, and I do believe that this is something that is possible. One last thing before I'll close. About a week and a half ago, there was a group of 107 former army generals, the heads of basically leaders who had been leaders within the Israeli Mossad, the Israeli army, some of the top generals, and some retired heads of the police forces, who came out with a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, and they basically said, listen, we have to find a way out. Where we are right now, we're stuck. We believe there are opportunities to move forward. We believe that we need strong and courageous leadership to move forward. The reason that I bring this to you is to say it's not just a single voice like mine, and it's not just my family. It is not just a group of people around me who share the same views I have that this is wrong. It's also people who are central, and there are conversations that are happening within our governments. And what I think we need to be able to do, and that is one of the things that I will ask to really, I hope, ask all of you to consider how you can do this, and please share with me your ideas of how perhaps you think I can do this, is that we need to find ways when we have leaders that will have the courage to move forward, that we'll be able to give wind to their sails so that they will bring us into a better place, and that wind will come from us, so we will bring ourselves to a better place. And I guess with that, I'll close and pass this to May. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I wanted to talk to you for a few more minutes about some of the work that we're doing in Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza. I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, paid close attention to what was happening this summer in Gaza. Gaza is one of the places where we work. We currently have 7,000 children that are in our programs in Gaza. And if you paid attention to the conflict, one of the devastating results was not only the deaths of many, but the deaths of children. So as a result of the conflict this summer, there were 503 Palestinian children who were killed in Gaza. There was one young boy who was Israeli who also was killed as a result of the increased conflict. And one of the things that we talk about is for children right now living in this part of the world, for children who are 7 years old, they have already lived through 3 wars. And that this is just wrong. That children are among those who are the most affected by violence and by the fact that we've not been able to come up with a peaceful solution. And so World Vision works in Gaza. We typically do development work. If you're aware of the situation there, basic fundamental needs such as water, 90% of the water was not fully treated prior to the conflict this summer. And when you look at statistics as a result of the summer's war, 1.8 million people, the entire population of Gaza, was affected. In our North Gaza program, the entire program was displaced from their home, 100%. And in South Gaza, 50% of the children were displaced from their homes. We had to stop our development work, and we began to only do humanitarian assistance of just providing basic needs. And some of the work that we're doing there now it's not work with education or work with sustainable development, it's humanitarian assistance because the crisis has become so severe. And as we're traveling around the United States last week and in this week ahead, we are seeking to talk to communities to let them know about some of those realities and to tell them some of the story that they might not have otherwise had the opportunity to hear. World Vision's work focuses significantly on child protection, and in addition to the humanitarian assistance work we do a lot of work with children in the West Bank. One of the issues that we focus closely on and we pay attention to, which we partnered with B'Tselem on and several other human rights organizations, is the issue of Palestinian children who've been arrested by the Israeli military. At any given time, there might be 150 to 200 Palestinian children in Israeli military prisons, and within a year, about 500 to 700 children go through the system. The vast majority of these children are arrested or accused or charged of throwing stones. And we were very concerned to learn that 60% or so of these children who are accused of throwing stones are arrested in the middle of the night by the military. And then they're handcuffed and blindfolded and taken away from their families prior to being interrogated. And so World Vision has been going to the U.S. government and going to powers on the ground to seek to address these concerns, to say that the arrest of children should be a last resort under any circumstances. We've been pleased that we've made very small steps of progress where one of the proposals on the table is the possibility that a summons could be issued so that children would not have to be arrested or experience this type of thing in the middle of the night. So these are the types of things that we're paying attention to and seeking to respond to on the ground in Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza. And as we're talking to churches in the U.S., one of the things we're also attempting to do, you might be familiar, Christians in the United States have very strong ideas about the Holy Land. And many times, those ideas are not the most helpful. They're not the most constructive. And so, as this issue is discussed within the Christian community, what we have found is that people have a tendency to be very polarized. They have very strong ideas one way or the other. That they're either very, very supportive of Israel, and if you say the word Palestine, they get very offended, or you have Christians in the United States who are very, very supportive of Palestine, and at times can be anti-Semitic. And we find that this conversation is not helpful, but that rather we must find a third way where we can speak truth and where we can talk about issues of justice, but where we can do so in a way that allows us creative space to be able to move forward in pursuit of peace. And that's a part of our goal. And one of the projects I've been working on personally over the last few years, I write some, and I have a couple of books out that are about social justice. And one of the books that just came out is a book that I wrote with some co-authors. We're all evangelical Christians, and the title of the book is Forgive Us, Confessions of a Compromised Faith. And in one of the chapters, I talk a bit about the way that the church in the United States has treated the Muslim community. And I have to say, it's devastating to me as a follower of Jesus to see some of the ways that we have responded to other people of faith. And so I hope that you hear from me my deepest grief, but also my apologies for ways that you might have been treated for things that you believe by other people who call themselves followers of Christ. I don't believe that is what Jesus calls us to do. I believe that Jesus calls us to be a lover of all people. And I believe that Jesus says to us that we should respond to the needs of all people, regardless of their religion or regardless of any differentiating factor. Of the children that I talked about in the West Bank and Gaza, those 47,000 children, 98% of those children are Muslim. And even though World Vision is a Christian organization, our goal is just to love them because we think that Jesus would love them. And the goal is not to convert them or to proselytize or to evangelize, but rather just to respond to their needs and to offer them love. And so I hope that as we continue to talk, that will be a part of what you hear from me, but also from my other brothers and sisters in Christ, that we seek to be good neighbors and to love you as our neighbors. So thank you for opening your home and your space of worship to allowing us to be with you tonight.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sami Awad from Bethlehem, and I bring you a greeting of hope and life and peace from your brothers and sisters in the Palestinian community and in the Israeli community as well. This is the third year we are doing this tour called Hope for the Holy Land. And this is the first year in the 3 years we have an Israeli Jew with us on this tour. And it's the first year we speak in a mosque, in an Islamic center. And it is truly a privilege and an honor for us, because for me, this completes the circle of hope. As you know very well, where we live, where I live, is a place that is on a daily basis experiencing violence that is growing at unprecedented levels. And yes, we might see the physical violence go up and down, but for me, I also look at the emotional and spiritual violence that the people of the land are suffering from. The level of hatred and the level of fear that now exists in the land that we all call holy. And when I look at hope and ask, where is the hope? Honestly, sometimes it's very difficult to see hope in the land itself. But one of the reasons why I actually come on this tour and tours like this is because I begin to see hope in people like you. People who are committed to peace and justice and truth. People who are committed to love and compassion. People who are committed to honoring every single human being as being created by God. And so I find hope in speaking with people who really understand what justice means. For me, my personal engagement in this work is pretty much because I don't have a choice. I live in Bethlehem. I'm a son of a refugee. My father became a refugee in 1948. His father was killed in the 1948 war, and my grandmother and her 7 children were kicked out from their home. But one of the things my grandmother always talked about after they became refugees was her neighbors. She lived in an area right outside the old city of Jerusalem called Musrara. And in this neighborhood, like many neighborhoods in the Holy Land, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived together in peaceful coexistence. One of the challenges we have as we're speaking with many churches here is the assumption that many people have that this is a historic religious conflict that's been going on for thousands of years. And for them, they link this biblically, that because it's been going on for thousands of years, it can never be resolved. This is just the way it is. The sons of Ishmael and Isaac, of Abraham, Ishmael and Isaac, this is their battle, and these people they're just continuing that battle. And they forget about those times when we actually lived as good neighbors with each other. My father was telling me a story a few months ago how he, as a child, as a Christian child, with the Muslim children of the neighborhood, used to go into the Jewish homes of their neighbors during Shabbat. If you know Shabbat, which is the sacred day of the week for Jews, where many Jews don't do any activity, these Christian and Muslim children were the ones who were responsible for turning on and off the ovens and turning on and off the lights to heat the food of their Jewish neighbors. So I think part of what we are trying to say is that what we want to create when we talk about peace in the Holy Land, it's not about creating something that never existed. Yes, we understand all the challenges that we face today. We understand that there is an occupier and an occupied, that there are victims of violence on both sides. There is hatred and anger and fear with everybody. But to return to that essence of our religions, the three Abrahamic religions that we all are part of, and to rebuild the Holy Land with a new vision of peace. One of the statements that my grandmother used to say, and she said this until she passed away, was that the greatest justice that we can attain as Palestinians is when we actually make peace and reconcile with our enemy. A statement that is difficult. It's not easy to even comprehend sometimes these statements, and for me as a person who lives there. But she would say clearly that revenge and retaliation have no place in our culture, in our tradition, and in our religions. We are not a people of revenge and retaliation. We are a people that seek peace and justice and equality. But growing up in Bethlehem wasn't easy for me to live this message, because almost every day of my life I either experienced, heard about, or witnessed the atrocities that we hear from the Israeli military occupation. And so the challenge with me, how do I balance this story of a mother or my grandmother who says seek peace with them, with a reality that justifies hatred and revenge and retaliation? And one of the concepts that I grew in learning as a young child, which as a Palestinian I am proud to say that Palestinians engage in, Muslims and Christians alike, is the understanding of nonviolence. Nonviolent resistance, nonviolent activism. Many people look towards us at the Middle East and say these are violent terrorist people, and they forget the many experiences of nonviolence. And actually how when I came to college in the United States, learned about nonviolence from the examples of the First Intifada. It was taught to me in college here. What I participated in the First Intifada was taught to me by American professors in university here. So we have something to be proud of. But for my personal journey, it was also very important to understand that hatred and violence is not something that is just reflected physically towards the other. Actually, hatred and violence begins with my heart. And then what my heart decides becomes reflected towards the other. And when I was engaging in nonviolence for many years, I began to understand that in my heart there was hatred. There was violence in my heart. There was darkness in my heart. And my process was to understand how I needed to heal myself from my internal violence, internal hatred, internal darkness, so that I can truly be nonviolent, seeking real peace and justice with the other. And as you are devout to your faith, I am also a person who seeks as much as I possibly can to be devout to my faith as well, which ultimately is one faith. But one of the greatest teachings that I have learned from the teachings of Jesus Christ is when he speaks about loving the enemy. And I see this understanding of loving the enemy, which many people around the world will say, oh, this is weak, this is being emotional, this is being passive, this is being shallow, this is being naive when you love your enemy. I have begun to see it as probably the greatest weapon of transformation that we could engage in. When we open our hearts to the other, it breaks down all the barriers. It destroys all the fear. It breaks down all the assumptions, all the expectations that the other could be violent to you. And out of this, one of the things that we are engaging in as an organization, in addition to fully standing with the full right of the Palestinians to live in freedom, to live in dignity and respect, justice and equality, is to really ask the question, what causes the Israelis to do what they do to us? It's easy for me to look at the action and say they are their action. But as people of faith, as Muslims, as people from the Middle East, we hear this all the time. Somebody commits an act of violence and we say they are all that, or they label us as that. And sometimes I think it's very important for us to check ourselves when we begin to label everybody by the actions. And so one of the things that we are engaging in, and we work with Jews, Christians, and Muslims in the Holy Land on this, is to look into how traumas of the past affect how people engage in the decisions they make in the present for the future. People who experience trauma, personally or collectively, sometimes do things that are completely irrational, maybe hurting to themselves as much as hurting to others. And for me, it was a proud moment a few years ago when I heard of Muslim leaders from around the world. I think the Imam remembers Safi Qasqas from Washington and other Muslim leaders who decided to really find out the history of the Jewish people by visiting places like the death camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau, where the Holocaust happened, where many of us say, oh, we have nothing to do with it. This is the German Jewish thing. We don't have to deal with it. But I think that move created such a big effect. And I, as a person, also have done this as well. I have visited these death camps. Learning about somebody's history is very important. It doesn't undermine my position when I learn about their history. And we are now actually sending Palestinian leaders to these places to really get this experience. Let us know who our enemy is, so that we can engage in real peacemaking with the enemy. One thing that we seek, and I'll just end by this, I would say me personally, but maybe also together, is to understand that peace is not what the politicians do. We have put our trust in politicians on all sides for so many years, and they have not come up with answers for us. One of the definitions of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And I think all of us are seeing these political negotiations happen over and over and over again, expecting a different results, and that does not happen. And so peace for us means bringing communities together, bringing people of faith together to talk about what does it mean to live in justice, equality, and freedom in the Holy Land. Despite whatever political solution might come out, the foundation is that the three religions, the three holy religions, have roots in the Holy Land, have a present in the Holy Land, and have a future in the Holy Land. And nobody can ever deny that. So thank you for your listening.
So now we'd like to open it for questions. So if anybody has questions or comments, please do so. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, we're gonna have some snacks. So we're gonna try to put a table on this side. So if you can move to the side. تفضل يا فتحي.
I have a comment regarding what the lady are aware of the situation in the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Actually, I would like to correct this statement a little bit. Now, if you go to the street outside and get any of those teenagers or anyone in the street and ask them about the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, you're going to see how he is very aggressive against the Palestinians, and he is pro-Israeli in general. Because for several reasons, they've been brainwashed, they've been brainwashed by strong media that is supporting Israel and supporting not the Israeli only, and the Zionist movement. From whatsoever they can do there, it's been covered here whatsoever. In Israel, you can see some of the media criticize the Israeli government. In America here, you cannot see that. In Israel, there is, in their parliament, you can see some members, they can criticize the government there. In the Congress here, no one can open their mouth and criticize Israel. As if the Congress being elected by the Israelis, it's not elected by the American people. When they need to decide something, rather the interest of Israel or interest of America, the Congress will put the interest of Israel ahead of the interest of America. At the end, the people here, we are fighting. It's like a rabbit facing an elephant. What we're going to do with a big amount of media is brainwash the people day and night, controlled by the Zionists here, and you're going to tell me that the people are aware of what? Ask anyone here in the street, ask any average person, tell them, what do you know about this? He will tell you what is the media is telling you. That's it.
Thank you. Well, was that a question or a comment?
Comment.
Would you like to respond? Sure.
I think it's very true that the conversation in Israel is much more robust than the conversation here in the United States, that there is a diversity of perspectives that you can hear on the ground in the Israeli community and in the Palestinian community, but both there it's much more complex. I think two things. I think it's changing here in the United States. Maybe not Congress, but at least in terms of the conversations, I think more and more people are becoming aware of things that you don't necessarily hear in the media. So I think that that's very positive. And the other piece that I think is encouraging is I have the privilege of being a part of conversations with the State Department. The State Department has started to engage in interfaith relationships and interfaith outreach on how can religious leaders influence the way that we're looking at the world. And so I have the privilege of sitting in many groups with Muslims and Christians and Jews who are seeking to then raise awareness and educate within their own religious communities. But part of what I also think that we need to do is that in our attempt to remedy one-sided media, I think we need to be very careful to not allow the pendulum to swing so far to the other side that in our desire to be delivered from oppression or to address injustices, that we become perpetuators of injustice ourselves. And I think when we see pain comes out no matter what. Pain will either come out in violence or it will come out in grief. And part of the goal of religious leaders and people who have faith is to carry the pain of our people and to determine constructive ways to move forward that do not further cause pain to others. So thank you. I appreciate your comment greatly. Yes, young man.
I have a question. Why do the Christians consider Muslims as a bad people?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest question we got on this tour. And you are so right. I mean, it's not about Christians. We have to say some Christians, because I would say most Christians are not aware even of what's going on, and most Christians don't even know or care about what's going on. But there are voices that I would say label themselves as Christians. I think these voices are only using the identity of Christian, but they are not following any of the teachings of Christianity. Because if they were following the teachings, they would not be doing the things they're doing or saying the things they are doing. And so we need to create awareness for them. a part of what we are doing in speaking is to try to speak this voice into these churches that are very violent towards Muslims and to Arabs. I'll just give one example. Last year we went and spoke in a church in California, and a pastor who was not part of that church came to this church. And I was standing outside. It was a beautiful day before the meeting started, and I saw this man walk with 4 other men walking on his side. And as he got closer, what I noticed on his shirt that he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, so it was San Diego, I think. And he had American flags all over his shirt. Then when he got closer, I saw that he had tanks and bombs and F-16 fighter jets all flying around the flags. I didn't know who he was, so he went in, we gave our presentation, and at the end he stood up and he said, "My name, blah, 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 I'm a pastor of this church." And my first reaction as a Christian, like, wow, this is a pastor. He's not even just a regular person, a pastor who's wearing a shirt with bombs and F-16 fighter jets. And then he spoke for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I can't remember, this very Islamophobic language, a language of violence towards Muslims. And he was challenging me as a Palestinian and as a Christian about why I want to make peace with Muslims when we are supposed to kill them. And for me, there was only one answer that I could give him, which is looking into the Injil, looking into the teachings of Jesus Christ, where Jesus, when it comes to the enemy, only says one thing. Jesus says, love your enemy. That's it. In anything about the enemy, Jesus says, love them. And so for me, I look at somebody like this and I question his Christianity when he is not following the teachings of Jesus.
A regular Joe. So in order for me to, to have a solution to a problem, I first have to define what the problem is. I'm sitting here trying to define, what's the problem. So we at least, when we walk out of this door, we want to see, okay, you got something. So what's the problem? So define the problem, and then maybe we'll come up with some solutions to that problem. And then one thing too, we are not your enemy. Thank you for the love, and I really thank you for the book. I'm going to Google that book, and hopefully we'll find it, and I'll read it. So just in order to, to have a solution to an issue, we first define what the issue is, what's the problem, and then we hopefully come with some suggestions, solution to that issue, and then we pick up one issue, one solution, and then okay, hopefully it will work. But it doesn't seem like this.
Oh, what's the problem?
Okay. No, I think there are a lot of different answers to that question. I think the very basic one is that there are two peoples who feel that they cannot represent themselves, live safely, be able to provide a future for their children, to be able to provide a present for their communities, to be able to look back and feel that their past is respected. And they feel that at this point, in order for both of those communities, both of those peoples, both of those nations, Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Palestinians to live to do that, it's going to have to come either one or the other. And I think at a very basic level, I mean, there have been tremendous historical injustices that have been done to the Palestinians, and I think it is very difficult for Israel as a country to recognize that Yes, there were injustices, and yes, the idea of a Jewish return to Israel, the sense that Jews can live as a free people after thousands of years of suffering in many ways, not always. Some of the finest times of Jewish history have actually been when Jews and Muslims lived in great peace. Some of the greatest Jewish philosophers grew out of those periods. Some of the greatest Muslim philosophers grew also out of those same periods. So it as I think May said, that it hasn't always been conflict between peoples or between religions. Because of these, I'll try to bring it actually much more specifically. I mean, I think we've had an opening up of the world in the 90s, I believe, that went part of the way, did not go all of the way, and there's still quite a lot of work to be done around the world as a whole. In our region as a whole, there are tremendous conflicts, problems, tensions. Not all of them, only some of them have to do with Israelis and Palestinians. But in the context of the conflict involving Israelis and Palestinians, there was a process that was started. There were great hopes by some that this process would lead to peace. It was meant, the Oslo process itself was meant to be a 5-year process leading to creating momentum. And this momentum would allow leaders on both sides to lead their people and make some very tough decisions about some critical issues, things like water and things like borders and things about how Jerusalem would be shared, things about how to deal with refugees. There are refugees both in the West Bank. Sami described his own story, and that's something that's quite tragic. So all of these are issues that everyone recognized were critical, needed to be solved, but we would leave them to the end of the process, and then we would create a momentum. So much people would want peace so badly that we would move forward. That process was derailed, and it was derailed for a range of reasons and mistakes by both sides. What we have to do, and here is perhaps where I think Sami's general approach of nonviolence and developing peace and understanding between people, of finding a love and a mutual respect is very valuable. From my perspective, I think part of the problem is actually in some of the political structures that we have in place, and that we have a need to move, to look at the solutions that were proposed, which, I mean, the basic idea is 2 states, 1 state for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and 1 state for Israel in the other portion of the land, and to find a way to move, in my mind, towards that solution, so that we can find, so that we can end this occupation, which is so horrific and it's horrible for the Palestinians, and it's horrible also for the Israelis who are stuck in a case of being caught oppressing another people. That's not a, I don't mean to make light of the suffering of the Palestinians at all. I don't mean to draw an equivalence. One person's suffering does not equal another person's suffering, and that's really not the point. But Israelis also are oppressed by the situation. This is something that hurts my children when they look towards their future, and it's not a future that I wish for them. I hope I'd be providing more for them. In terms of what the problem is right now, and now I'll get to something very specific, I think part of the problem is that we lack leaders on both sides that are able to take courageous steps to move forward. In this, many of you, I'm sure, have been following, as I have, the growing tensions in Jerusalem and the growing feeling that there is a threat to the status of Islam in Jerusalem, or the status of Palestinians and the Arab people, I think, in Jerusalem specifically. The conflict has religious and national elements. One of the reasons why this conflict is happening right now is we're in a situation where leadership, on both leaders who don't have a vision necessarily of peace, but are fearful of moving and in any other direction, are fanning the flames rather than calming them. So we have leaders both amongst the Palestinians and amongst the Israelis. I'll speak about the Israelis who are using, who are playing to radicals, at least within Israel, who wish to change and wish to continue oppression and don't have a vision of peace. And the leaders who are the national leaders, at least in Israel, who need to be taking courageous steps rather than doing that or seeking the safety of fanning flames of hatred. I think what we need to do as a problem is enable those leaders to challenge our leaders to take courageous steps. If they're willing to take courageous steps and take advantage of a new situation, which I think exists at present in the Middle East, to move forward, that we will help them for that. And as together with this challenge, if they're not going to take those steps, then we have to be willing. I mean, this is the challenge that I have as an Israeli. We have to be willing to find a new leadership and to cultivate that and grow and show people that we can, that by taking the courageous steps forward, we will be able to move towards a peaceful solution. So, thanks.
I want to be brief as well. There are many problems. And we could define many problems. There isn't one problem. I think there are many problems that need for us to deeply engage in. I'll just mention two things that I'm working on in terms of problems that I hope that we could also see partnership to look into together. One problem I see is that when engaging in peace work is motivated by fear, then you can never achieve peace. And I would challenge my Israeli friends and even the Palestinian friends and say that most of our engagement in peace work is motivated because we are afraid. We are afraid they will kill us, so let's make a deal with them. Let's sign an agreement, but let's get as much as we can out of this deal. Okay? Also looking into the history of the Jewish people, which I talked about a little bit, that the trauma of the Jewish experience in Europe in the past continues to be lived out today in the Jewish mindset. And the thought that this might happen to us again continues to exist in Jewish mindset because that trauma and that experience has never been healed and brought to a closure. And so I think part of the global responsibility now is to how do we address this issue of fear that exists in the process itself. I cannot make peace with you because I'm afraid of you that you will kill me. I want to make peace with you because I respect you and you trust me and respect me that we could live together in peace. We don't have this. We haven't had this for many years. The second problem I would see is in the political process itself. The problem I see is that when we were having the negotiations, we were focusing so much on finding a political solution, a nation-state solution, that we forgot one of the most important issues that is so sensitive to all the communities of the Holy Land, which is the religious and spiritual issue. I used to be a person that used to say, religion is the cause of the problems. This is why we have to put religion on the side. And that's what the politicians did. They said, religion is the cause, so let's put religion on the side, and let's find a political solution. If we want to really be honest with each other, the borders that are being drawn now between the state of Palestine and the state of Israel, the two-state solution, the Green Line, as you know it's called, what cultural, religious, historical significance does it have to any of the people that live in this land? Nothing. It was a ceasefire line in 1948 that was signed between Jordan and Israel. As a Christian, my history, from the Christian point of view, is in all of the land. For the Jew, there's actually more Jewish tradition in the West Bank than in all of Israel. And so we were going to create a political solution that was going to limit the freedom of worship, of religious practice. Now what we're trying to say, and I think this is where the solution comes, is to say religion and the engagement of religious leaders and spiritual leaders is where the solution will be for peace in the Holy Land. This does not negate 1 state, 2 states, 10 states. That's not the issue. But when there is peace between the religions of the land again, then we could create a political framework that honors that.
If I can just add one more thing. I mean, I think one of the issues with religion in this context is that we have a choice to use our religions in order to find and build peace. We have traditions within our religions. I believe, as the Imam's sermon today stated very clearly, we have traditions within our religions, within Islam, within Judaism, within Christianity, that lead towards peace. That choice, and this comes to the choice that we have, is how we wish to use the traditions, to use the religious traditions in order to move forward. And the richness of our tradition is such that we have a good basis to help us to do that.
Excuse me one thing. Please, when you talk about the peace, please, you need to know that the peace never comes unless you place the justice, unless you execute and carry out the justice. When some people coming from 3,000 years ago, and they said, I'm coming back to this land because I was here 3,000 years ago, then they kicked the original people that are living there, their homes, their lands, their even furniture. And since the Christianity in Palestine, since century 1, there was no Jewish in Palestine until century 20 when they migrated under the umbrella of the British colonialism in Palestine. Then they said, this is my land because I was here 3,000 years ago. And you said, peace. Let's practice the justice first. Now, there is no peace without justice. Now, you're talking about the 3,000 years and 2,000 years as if they are 2 years and 3 years. You jump on the whole history and come back and say, this is my land, I was here 3,000 years ago. Even the history of America is 300 years old. Now, I understand it's a fact. There is an Israel and there is Jewish. Fine. But how about the Palestinians that they are kicked out of their lands and homes? Where is the justice in this? This is the justice. When there is a justice, there will be a peace. I'm not afraid of dealing with my enemies if they want to sit down and work on justice, not just to threaten me under the support of America, building settlements, building lands and building homes in my. Every day there is a new order by the Israeli government that they want to build new settlements in West Bank. Every day, and they're talking about the peace. Let's practice the justice first here.
Okay, who would like to? Yeah, no. Thank you. I'm glad this came up. I'm angry too about injustice, and I think that we need to move towards a better, more just world. There are a couple of different ways we can approach this. We can continue to tell stories of ongoing injustice and what happened in our past. I think we need to deal with those. I don't think that's a simple thing. We can argue about history. I would argue that there were always Jewish communities within the land of Palestine, whatever it was called, at different periods. We can talk about that. We can share. They weren't at some historical periods they were larger. At some they were smaller. The return of Jews to the region began before the British. So it's older. There's a stronger, longer, broader history than I think you're giving credit to. But I don't think that's really the point. I think it is.
Tell me what you want to do with the Palestinians, refugees, 7 million Palestinians around Palestine or around Israel. What do you want to do with those?
To say that I have all of the answers, I don't. To say that I think that is a problem that we need to deal with and we need to focus on, I think we do. I think the other question that I have is it's not just about whatever has happened in the past. To say that right now there are 8.2 million Israelis who live there, who were born in the land, who grew up there, who speak Hebrew, who also own homes, who also own things. So the challenge that we have now is how do we move forward from a time when there was an injustice that was done and find ways to fix that injustice, which I think we can, or to find ways to move, or to find ways to argue over the injustice and to deny each of us, any right to live in the present and live moving towards the future.
I just want to add very quickly, the challenge that we have, and I say this as a Palestinian, the challenge we have is not with Jewish presence in the land. I have not heard any Palestinian ever criticize Jewish presence in the land. I think.
I said it's a fact.
Yeah. So our challenge, exactly. Our challenge, yeah. So let's not talk about the history of who was there first. The reality is that there are Jews, Christians, and Muslims who live in this land. The challenge I have as a Palestinian is when one religion claims exclusivity in this land. One religion wants to control aspects of this land because of where they stand in strength and power, and that means others are oppressed by this exclusive claim. And so going back to the question, what is the problem? It is not the problem of Jewish presence in this land. It is the problem of how can we allow for all the three religions to live in justice, equality, trust, and respect, and peace with each other. This is what we need to work on for the future. Not about how do we deal with the pain of the past, but how do we create the hope for the future. I see the settlements every day. I live in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is 5 minutes away from Jerusalem. I cannot go to Jerusalem because of the checkpoints and the permits. So I am suffering over there. The question is, I can live in my pain and my suffering and my victimization, or do I really engage in finding positive, proactive solutions? Yeah, this is what we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to look at the whole conflict differently. This is why I'm saying the political process has failed, that we all supported at one point. How can we really engage in peacemaking? How can I seek equality in the land? I used to seek political freedom in the land. Maybe we need to switch some of the conversations we have, even as Palestinians. My family is from Jaffa. The political two-state solution denies me all right to Jaffa as a refugee. Yeah.
أنا لا أريد أن أحمل أفراد الحاضرين معنا عبء الحكومات. عبء الحكومات إحنا نفسنا مش عارفين نشتغل عبء حكوماتنا وفسادها. أنا أريد إنه يعني نتكلم بإن الناس جايين يدعوا إلى شيء، عاوزين نحفز هذا الشيء. السؤال اللي أنا بسأله لأبو حمزة، السؤال بتاعي اللي عاوز أسأله، معلش عفوا، السؤال بتاعي اللي عاوز أسأله إنه إيه إمكانية تفعيل مثل هذه اللقاءات داخل إسرائيل عشان نخلق قاعدة من الشعب الإسرائيلي اللي يكون متجاوب مع أفكار السلام، مع أفكار التعايش بين الأديان الثلاثة كما كانت تعيش من قبل في بيت المقدس وفي داخل فلسطين. كانوا يتعايشون كما كانوا يتعايشون في مصر، كانوا يتعايشون في كل البلاد. الأديان الثلاثة كانت موجودة. إيه إمكانية تفعيل مثل هذه اللقاءات داخل إسرائيل؟ يا ترى هم جربوا إنه يفعلوا هذه اللقاءات داخل إسرائيل ولا ما جربوش ده؟ وهل بإمكانهم يجربوا هذا في داخل إسرائيل؟ يبقى شيء جيد جدا لو أنه ده تم تفعيله داخل إسرائيل. لو سمحت.
The imam is actually doesn't want to, translating for him, doesn't want to burden you with the behavior or the consequences of the government, any government or any political entity answering this kind of a questioning. So he doesn't want to burden you as an individual with the political process that's happening on both sides. Yeah, we cannot answer, you cannot answer the, on behalf of the mistakes of a government, a political government. So that's just said. His question actually, how your panel, how this sitting can be implemented in Israel. How is the sitting of peace? How is the sitting of conversation? How is sitting of awareness can be invented in meetings in Israel to spread that thought of cooperation, that thought of peace? That's Imam's question. Is that possible?
Yes, I think it is. I think now we have opportunities to move forward. There are many reasons why these conversations will not move forward. Some of it is the pain and the ongoing feeling of injustice, which weighs very heavily. I think one of the there was a very There was a very small thing that happened a week ago where the new president of Israel made an apology. He came to a specific town where in 1956 there was a group of Palestinian laborers who were coming back, who had not heard that there was a curfew declared, and they were fired on and many were killed. It's a very, very small thing, but the reason why I mention it is that it's a sign of a certain maturity. It took quite a long time for the Israeli government, the president of the state, or anyone really, to say that there was an injustice that was done. The reason I bring that is I bring that as a sign that there is a greater willingness now than there was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, to accept that there have been injustices, to accept that we as Israel have been responsible for some of those injustices, and that part of this healing process means recognizing the injustice. It means doing more, I believe. It means also trying to fix those injustices. That also is a great challenge for us. I also think, and this speaks specifically to your question, that there are conversations that are happening. It is one of the things that gives me a tremendous amount of strength and hope is the fact that I can think of people, whether it is not always from the left in Israel, but also from the right, people who are trying to come together and speak. Some of them are religious and are right-leaning. Some of them are religious Jews, now I'm speaking of, religious and left-leaning. They're finding ways to speak. Some of the conversations that are happening, I'm aware of conversations that are happening on the part of leadership. Some of the top leadership within the Jewish community of Israel are meeting with Palestinians, Muslims and Palestinian Christians who are leaders of their communities inside of Israel. This extends even to leaders in Gaza, leaders in bringing people together who have not been talking. So I do believe wherever one looks, one does have to look. It's not spreading like wildfire, but there are initiatives that are happening. These initiatives are tremendously important, mostly because the population doesn't want to see this happening. It's a matter of the religious conversations are happening, some of the political conversations are happening, and there are also a general sense of many people that the situation as it exists right now is not helping both of our peoples. Together with that, on the side of, so if that's the case, why isn't there peace? Together with that, there remains a tremendous amount of fear, a tremendous amount of pain, and I guess part of our challenge now is to find ways to use in wherever the conversations are happening that are relevant to us, whether it's between small communities, whether it's on the part of religious leaders, to find the courage to push through some of that pain and push through some of that hatred. But I do think these conversations are happening, and it's something that's quite extraordinary. I'm very happy if you'd like to share more and to connect you to some of them if you're interested.
Just a comment first, that the concept of peace, the concept of justice, especially when it's related to the Holy Land, since that's what we're talking about, is not new. You know, if we go back many centuries, actually you can go to San Francis through the Crusade. And what he did as adopting, he was a knight. He was actually carrying a sword. He was actually fighting. But following the guidance of Jesus Christ and love your enemy and seek peace, he crossed the lines and he, put Christianity and the faith and the teaching of Jesus into action. So it's obvious that the conflict or the problem is the fight between good and evil. And I think the more awareness, and that's what I commend your panel and your organization, and that's the question for the sister, how the Muslim can be part of this, can be part of your travel, because we are willing, and if we can help, how we can be part of it, and how actually we bring that awareness of the correct teaching of Islam, the correct teaching of Christianity, and the correct teaching of Judaism. That's, I think, where hopefully the force of good will surpass and overcome the good of evil.
Well, in terms of this tour and what role Muslims can play, ahlan wa sahlan. We've been talking about that, and how can we create space to have someone travel with us? So, put you on our list. The young man said, "Why do Christians hate Muslims?" And I think part of why is because we don't know you. And so I look forward to opportunities. You said raising awareness. I think that is such a critical component. And the gentleman who just left said, but wait, what can we do? How can we change it? We have to change the conversation here in the United States of America. And in some ways, the conversations in terms of some of the most peace-loving, justice-oriented people I know on behalf of Palestinians actually are Israelis. And they inspire me. And yet here in the United States, the conversation has not progressed so far. And yet the US is so powerful politically. But that's where I also think we have great hope to change the conversation that's happening here in America. Next week, we're going to be meeting with some members of the White House administration. And I don't know if you know, it's kind of the best kept secret of the American government. The national security staff member for the White House who oversees the work on Israel-Palestine. Does anyone know who he is? His name is Maher Batar, and he is a Palestinian Christian. And so part of, and he should not be the only voice, right? But I think part of what we're seeking to do is to change the dialogue as it's happening here in the US. And I would welcome learning how to do that together.
Yes, sir.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful. We know that God is merciful. All of us are. Luckily today we're the people of faith. And we claim to follow truth. And we know that God is truth. And we know that God is justice. He created everything with absolute truth and justice. You will never find a conflict between truth and truth. It never exists. But you'll always find conflict between truth and falsehood. This happened throughout history. So as to, sorry, I'm speaking here generally as far as we're just being human beings. We're in this, I call it refugee camp, so that we could go back to paradise eventually, God willing. Now, those who follow truth would go back to paradise, and all the religions. But we should be asking ourselves, then, if truth is one, and everyone is claiming they're following truth and they're fighting for truth. And let's not beat around the bush. This conflict is based on, it's a faith-based conflict. Everyone thinks they're right and the other party is wrong, and I'm right. And everybody claims to follow God. How many gods are there? There's only one God. Correct? Allah, call him any name you want. He's one God. If he's one and he's truth, he sends nothing but the truth, and truth never changes. Falsehood changes. So I'm smelling the food. I'm hungry too. So my question,
That
is
is the truth.
we should be asking. Yeah, that's the absolute truth. My question is, we should be asking ourselves. God says in the Quran, Allah says that Allah will never change the condition of the people unless they change themselves. So it is up to us to look in within ourselves. If we say, what is the problem, then I should be asking myself, what is truth? Am I on truth? Which camp am I on? Because if you look back throughout history, the Jews with Moses, may the peace of God be upon him, were tortured and killed. Their children were killed the same way the children of Israel, Palestine are being killed today. Who came to save us? Save them? Moses. Well, save us, I'm saying, because they were Muslims. They submit their will to God, and God saved them. So, and today it's just it looks like the tables have turned, and it's going to continue. Another group would oppress another group. We should be asking ourselves, what is the root of the problem? If truth is one, then we should be all seeking that truth within us. We should be asking ourselves, what is truth? Am I on truth? And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I think that concludes the question and answer session. So we won't stay late. As always, breaking bread with each other brings people closer. So we brought some snacks, some Palestinian dishes. You might disagree, but they are. It's hummus, and I'm pretty sure it's. Just kidding.
So
So I'd like to start with the ladies, if you can come and be served. And then we'll open it to everybody else.